Frances Colpitt kept the tidiest house on Marrow Lane. Her roses climbed the porch trellis in perfect rows, her lace curtains never gathered dust, and every Sunday the whole street could smell her pies cooling on the windowsill. Neighbors in the small town of Alder Hollow adored her. She had a kind word for the butcher, a warm smile for the schoolchildren, and a gentle laugh that made strangers feel instantly at ease. She had lived alone since her husband's passing some years back, but loneliness never seemed to touch her. There were always visitors. Distant cousins came to stay for a season. Old family friends arrived unannounced and lingered for weeks. Traveling salesmen, passing through on business, would stop for a cup of tea and somehow find themselves still in Alder Hollow a month later, charmed by Frances's hospitality and her endless patience. It was Elmer Wick, the postman, who first noticed the pattern. Letters addressed to men he'd delivered mail to for months would simply stop arriving. No forwarding address, no note, no goodbye. When Elmer asked Frances one afternoon about her cousin Harold, who had been staying with her all summer, she only smiled and said Harold had gone back west, chasing some opportunity or another. Elmer nodded and thought little of it. People moved on. People left towns behind. But then came the smell. Faint, sweet, and strangely wrong, drifting up from the cellar door whenever the wind shifted just right. Frances always kept that door locked tight, and when curious neighbors asked why, she'd laugh softly and explain she was simply storing her preserves down there. Nothing more, nothing worth troubling over. By the time autumn settled over Alder Hollow, 3 men who had once been welcomed into that tidy little house had vanished completely, as if the earth itself had swallowed them. And still Frances Colpitt kept smiling, kept baking, kept tending her roses, moving through her quiet life as though nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. Sheriff Boone Radley wasn't a suspicious man by nature, but even he couldn't ignore the pattern forming around Marrow Lane. 3 missing men, each one connected to the same soft-spoken widow, each one gone within months of arriving in Alder Hollow. He paid Frances a visit on a gray October afternoon, half expecting excuses and nervous stammering. Instead, she welcomed him warmly and insisted he stay for pie. Harold went west, she told him, pouring tea with steady, unhurried hands. Mr. Doyle went back to his wife in Kessler County. I believe he missed her terribly. And poor Mr. Vance, well, he just up and left one morning without so much as a note. Men do that sometimes, Sheriff. They come, they go. And a woman learns not to ask too many questions. Radley asked carefully about the cellar. Frances's smile never wavered, but something behind her eyes went still and cold, like a pond freezing over in the first hard frost. "Just my preserves," she said lightly. "You're welcome to look, if it would ease your mind." He did look. He found rows of pickled vegetables, sacks of potatoes, jars of preserved fruit, and nothing else. No bodies, no blood. Only that faint, sweet smell that seemed to cling stubbornly to the cold stone walls, impossible to place, impossible to prove. Radley left the house frustrated, certain in his bones that something was deeply wrong, yet unable to point to a single piece of evidence. That same week, a 4th man arrived in town, a traveling insurance salesman named Curtis Pell, asking around about lodging. Frances met him at the general store, all warmth and easy charm, and offered him a room in her house at a fair, friendly price. Curtis Pell would never be seen in Alder Hollow again. Weeks after Frances vanished from Marrow Lane, a bank clerk in the neighboring town of Pruitt's Crossing noticed something that troubled him deeply. A woman matching Frances's exact description, though calling herself Mrs. Agatha Renwick, had opened a substantial account using paperwork bearing the signature of Curtis Pell, the missing insurance salesman. But the signature was shaky and forced, nothing like the confident, practiced hand Pell had used on his original policy documents months earlier. Sheriff Radley traveled to Pruitt's Crossing the moment word reached him, but Mrs. Renwick had already withdrawn her funds and disappeared 2 days before his arrival. What he found in the boarding house room she'd rented chilled him more than any body ever could have. A small leather ledger hidden carefully beneath a loose floorboard. Inside were names, dates, precise sums of money: Harold, Doyle, Vance, Pell. Each name was listed beside a figure: life insurance payouts, inheritance transfers, small fortunes collected under invented identities after each man's disappearance. Frances hadn't merely been hosting these men in her tidy little house. She had been marrying them under false names, quietly insuring their lives, and then making them vanish before collecting every last payout. The ledger held one more detail that turned Radley's blood cold. A fifth name he didn't recognize: Reginald Astor. Beside it, no sum was written yet, an account still open, a plan still unfinished, a man somewhere out there who had no idea he was already marked. Radley understood then that he wasn't chasing a grieving widow with an unfortunate string of houseguests. He was chasing a predator who had turned marriage itself into a hunting ground, and she was already stalking her next victim, somewhere far beyond his reach. Word spread quickly through the county. A woman calling herself by 6 different names was courting lonely, moderately wealthy men and vanishing with their fortunes and quite possibly their lives. Sheriff Radley wired every sheriff's office within 200 miles, describing Frances down to the small mole above her left eyebrow and her curious habit of humming softly while she baked. In the town of Kessler Ford, a widower named Reginald Astor read the wire notice in his local newspaper with a growing sense of dread. He had met a charming widow calling herself Clara Whitfield only 3 weeks earlier. She was warm, attentive, and endlessly patient with his awkward courtship. She had already suggested they marry quickly and quietly, and gently proposed that he name her as the beneficiary on a new life insurance policy, just to be safe, given his age and his health. Shaken, Astor went straight to the local sheriff. Together, they devised a trap. Astor would keep his planned dinner engagement with Clara as though nothing were wrong, while lawmen waited nearby, ready to intervene the moment she appeared at his door. But Frances never came. Somehow, through sharp instinct, sheer luck, or a warning from some unknown source, she had already left town that very morning. Her boarding house room stood stripped bare, her trail gone cold once again, as though she had simply sensed the trap closing before it ever sprang shut. Astor survived, shaken but unharmed. In the years that followed, he told his story to newspapers again and again, becoming the only known man to escape Frances Colpitt's pattern before it could be completed. But the woman herself had slipped through the fingers of every lawman searching for her, vanishing into the vast anonymous country beyond Alder Hollow's borders, taking the truth of Harold, Doyle, Vance, and Pell with her into the unknown. For years, the case of Frances Colpitt remained an open wound in Alder Hollow. A story told in hushed voices around kitchen tables. A name that made people lock their doors a little tighter after dark. Sheriff Radley eventually retired without ever finding her. The missing men were never recovered, alive or dead. The cellar on Marrow Lane was torn down not long after Frances vanished, and no bones were ever found in its stone foundation, though many townsfolk always quietly suspected the diggers simply hadn't gone deep enough. Then, nearly a decade later, a firehouse in a town 3 states away brought a strange discovery to light. Firefighters clearing the smoldering debris found a fireproof strongbox buried in the cellar, untouched by the flames that had consumed everything around it. Inside was a second ledger, its handwriting and careful structure nearly identical to the one Radley had uncovered in Pruitt's Crossing years before. This ledger listed 6 more names, 6 more men, 6 more sums of collected money, spanning towns across 2 different states. The earliest entry dated just 18 months after Frances vanished from Alder Hollow. The burned house had belonged to a widow known locally as Mrs. Louisa Hartwell, a woman neighbors remembered as warm, generous, and an excellent baker, with a small mole above her left eyebrow. She had left town abruptly 2 years earlier, telling no one where she was going or why. No photograph of Mrs. Hartwell was ever found. No trace of her was ever recovered. But the handwriting in that second ledger, forensic experts later confirmed beyond doubt, was an exact match to Frances Colpitt's own hand. Proof, finally, that she had never stopped, never been caught, and had simply kept finding new towns, new names, and new men willing to trust a kind smile and a warm slice of pie. Frances Colpitt's true fate remains unknown to this day. Frances Colpitt was never caught. No trial, no confession, no grave. Just a ledger, a mole above the eyebrow, and a trail of names that stretches further than anyone ever imagined. If this case gave you chills, hit subscribe, because next week we're uncovering another true crime story that history tried to forget. And drop a comment. Do you think she's still out there? Let's discuss below.